Welcome back to Fair's Writing Academy, voted most likely to make up a quote by someone else by Vogue magazine. And today we will be talking about, well, first of all, your books don't matter, and your medium does. But we'll be starting off first with the fact that the books don't matter. And it's a fact, they don't. The books do not matter. And nope, spin-offs don't matter either. It's one of the dumbest arguments I've ever heard anyone make on any show ever. They've always said, well, the book was better, or the book explains it. Well, whether or not the book was better may very well be true, but using that as a defense for the show is the problem. So let's start on the defensive side. Whenever I point out plot holes in Harry Potter or talk about the ridiculousness of some of the things that happened in the movie or why didn't they just do X, so many Harry Potter fans will whip out their wands and immediately declare, well, if you read the books... No. The books don't matter. That's really great for the books. That's all well and good for everything in the book-iverse of the Harry Potter series. Meanwhile, I was over here talking about the movie. If you could get on point, that would be great. Because it does not matter if it explained it in the books, it did not explain it in the movies. And because of that, that means that the movie does not have that part explained, and therefore the movie, which is what we were talking about before you brought up the books for some reason, was not all that good. Then on the other side, we have the people claiming that something was bad because it didn't follow the books. Well, here's a maddening idea for you. The books and the movie are two completely different mediums, and we'll get into why things have to change from one to the other later, but they do. Trust me here, it does. Just because the movie did not follow, the show, whatever, did not follow the source material perfectly, does not mean that it itself is bad. Again, we're not talking about the source material, we're talking about whether or not it was good on its own 2 feet.
Oh, well then you're just not dedicated to learning about the intricacies of the story?
That's a funny way to say that they made it to just jerk off the fanboys without actually caring whether or not it was a good show. What a dumb argument. If it can't be enjoyed by someone who doesn't dedicate their life to researching the fucking lore behind the show, then it's not a good show. And you can't be surprised when people who are average viewers don't like it. Not everyone wants to become part of your fandom. And frankly, they shouldn't have to enjoy the show. DC and Marvel are rapidly approaching the point where it is almost impossible for them to attract new viewers who haven't previously been invested in their series. The expanded universe has gotten too big. DC has this problem a lot more because their expanded universe is a fucking timeline spaghetti that is so hard to follow. Their primary live-action timeline is a fucking bowl of udon. It's ridiculous. You will not find the central story by watching any one particular one. As such, it's not all that great for the outside viewer. At this point, it's just become too confusing for me to get in on, and Marvel seems to be heading down the same pathway, trying to create a religious fandom defense. They have all of these mini-series on Disney Plus, and they're trying to branch out all over the place, and all of it culminates together in these big cosmic intergalactic threats that require at least 13 different heroes to appear and at least 5 different heroically posing in a line shots. This leads to way too many questions about their over-expanding universe, like, where the fuck was Captain Marvel while hundreds of thousands of planets were being wiped out, half of their population at a time, by Thanos? This is a question that they don't really answer, and they're going to have to patchwork that later because their expanded universe hadn't accounted for her. There's too much going on at once, and too many people with too much reach as heroes for there to be not all of them all in one place at any one time, especially if the threat is on a galactic scale. But with the ever-increasing amount of miniseries and other content that they're bringing into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, it becomes harder and harder for new people from the outside to enjoy any of their content. Which, surprisingly enough, is one of the few things that Star Wars has been doing right. It doesn't matter that they shot their own content, canon, and fans in the foot along the way. That was one of the few things they did right. Each story in Star Wars is relatively self-contained. The 9 movies in a row make up 3 self-contained stories that you could individually enjoy each one of. And yes, of course, you have to watch the previous one in order to get the next one because it's a sequel. A sequel is not the same as an expanded universe. But that being said, something like The Mandalorian was very self-contained. It didn't require any of the other characters to come up. It didn't require any major research. Yes, there was the whole thing about the Mandalorians, and they name-dropped a few people here and there, but you didn't need to know who any of these people were. They weren't crucial to the story. Like, who that Mandalorian chick was did not matter. It was irrelevant. You knew who she was in this story, you knew what her motivations were, and you learned that really neat plot twist at the end behind her obsession. In fact, knowing about that relic beforehand is completely irrelevant because it's the difference between whether or not you know that the twist is coming, whether or not you know how important it is. So funny enough, Star Wars managed to do something right on the one show that they actually got right since they were acquired by Disney. What was I talking about again? Oh right, books. They don't matter. For all the reasons I stated before, it has to actively work as a story without you having to go around and pick up all the supporting information elsewhere. If I'm reviewing a show, I'm reviewing that show. If I'm reviewing a sequel series, I am reviewing a sequel series. If I'm reviewing a spin-off, I will only accept that the spin-off requires me to have viewed the original series. I will not accept if you have 3 different spin-offs on 5 different shows, and you require me to watch all of them to understand what's going on in any one of them. That's too much. That's holding your audience hostage. Look, you must consume all of our products, because if you don't consume all of our products, then you won't understand what's going on in any of them. You've already invested too much time to walk away now. This is not a healthy relationship with the group running your show. So, spin-offs should not count towards the main storyline. And if you're going to make your spin-off count towards the main storyline, there sure as fuck better not be more than one spin-off. But your medium does matter. I know, part 2 of the video, welcome to it. But your medium does matter because your medium will dictate a huge amount of what parts of your story you need to accentuate, what parts you need to focus on, all of these things. Your medium will dictate a huge amount of how you tell your story and what you're going to have to actually tell versus show. And we'll talk about what it excels at and what it fails at. Books excel at setting a scene. They excel at telling you what's in people's minds and at properly portraying the emotion and atmosphere of the area without actually having to make the area. You don't have to rely on a visual medium, you don't have to rely on an art department. Whatever the people think in their mind it looks like, in order to fit the emotion and atmosphere you have set up, is what it's going to look like in their mind. And no amount of fantasy will alter whether or not your vision is coming to life, because you don't have to worry about whether or not you can build it or render it in the way that you wanted. You can just describe it how you wanted, and you're budget free. The world is your making, and it's great at giving you an inside expression as to what people are feeling. There's no guesswork based on their tone or their facial expression. You can tell them. Narration does not feel all that wrong in a book. But you can't use narration in other mediums because it feels out of place. It takes you out of the story half the time. It's very hard to do narration correctly in a movie. Books excel at setting scenes and adding detail into the story and the adventure that you otherwise wouldn't have time for in something else that, has a set pace, like a show or a movie. It has a predetermined set pace of the actual passage of time, so you can't get too into detail over certain things, and you can't rely on anyone's imagination to fill in the blanks where you don't want to add too much detail. Video games were left out of our, little script here, but we decided later to put them in. Video games definitely have a story to tell. The problem with video game storytelling is that you have to accept that your player might not be playing the hero that you're trying to make them. You are the hero and the great savior of all these people. Me, 2 minutes later, pushing people off of a cliff to watch their bodies bounce down the rocks. It's sort of hard to, really fit into the character sometimes if you're trying to force me down a line. The story has to be broken up enough that there's actual gameplay in your game. And the gameplay itself should be the major focus of your game. But video games are not the focus of this video, so onward to comics, or manga, or graphic novels, or anything else to describe bits of texts over drawings and pictures. You're not special. These are really good because you can set scenes and imagery with your actual drawings, so you don't have to describe any of it. These cut out a massive issue of trying to describe your characters or describe what their things look like or what their individual attacks can do, because you can just show that in the pictures. These also have the advantage over movies because, well, you can just stop and tell what your person is thinking about. You can't do that in a lot of other situations because what they're thinking about is purely inside of their head, and you don't want to narrate. Like books, they gain the ability to talk about what's inside the character's head, what they're thinking. And like movies, they don't have to worry about whether or not you've defined something enough in the text because you just draw it. If it's far in the background and very fuzzy on detail, then it wasn't an important detail. If it's near the foreground and you've added a lot of detail to it, then it's an important part of the story. It's much easier to set the mood like this, to change how the characters are reacting based on what animation you're giving them, quote-unquote animation. And you can have them formulate their battle strategy inside their head without having to worry about what consciously thinking about these words would do in actual time, because they're not in actual time, you're only showing individual freeze frames. It's actually a wonderfully modular medium. What it does not do, fights. I know a lot of people say, oh, this fight looked really epic in the manga. I'm terribly sorry, but fighting and action is very much owned by visually moving media. It is absolutely monopolized. The difference between an amazing fight in a manga and an amazing fight in a visual moving media like shows, movies, animation, or whatever is worlds apart. It's way more exciting. I'm sorry, it is. It's so much more investing because you're watching it unfold in actual time. That's why so many comics, manga, whatever, want to move into mobile animated media like live action or cartoons or whatever. Because motion is owned by motion media. Unfortunately, this does come with a bit of a detriment. First of all, in shows, movies, moving media, narration is frowned upon. People watching these want to be immersed. No one wants to have some voiceover telling them what the feeling is, or telling them how things are on the screen, or explaining the situation to everyone. No. You have to show that, not tell it. It's not easy to show complicated themes or emotions purely through visual medium. It's much easier to be able to say it or write it somewhere. And that's not an option in moving media. Another thing is the constraint of time that comes along with motion media. Everything has to happen in time, which means that if you wanted them to notice something really quick, you're going to have to either use slow-mo or find some way to put it on the screen unmissably to the audience in order to make it clear that that's an important thing that they are focusing on. That or you'll have to play off the fact that the audience didn't notice. You also have to worry about whether or not you're setting the right theme, the right tone, the right emotion, so your actor's ability to convey that emotion, and whether or not they have the face that does convey that emotion, will change too. It's really hard to view Danny DeVito in a serious situation. Anytime you see Danny DeVito, you don't think of incredibly glorious and hard-hitting wars and dark themes. No, you just feel this overwhelming joy of happiness, comedy, and sexual arousal. You get used to it once you've experienced him a few times. So you should plan your story accordingly to what kind of story you're trying to tell and what it is or is not going to be. And it's something you should definitely judge when you're watching a show. Did they utilize their medium properly? Should they have just gone for another medium? Or perhaps, are they using their genre properly? Should they have gone for another genre? Like that anime redo of a healer, where they very clearly just wanted to make revenge porn hentai, but for some reason decided to market it as an 18+ anime. I'm not saying that you can't like it. I'm not even gonna go into like moral implications and all that bullshit. I'm just saying that they very clearly wanted it to be a fucking hentai, but decided partway through that they weren't willing to get all the way into the fucking water. Hit it or quit it with your genre sometimes. I'm really not a fan of people trying to like half-ass the genre, that way they can get away with a technically larger audience. Look, it's okay you're watching this because it's not a hentai. It's just an 18+ show. It's a hentai. If you are watching Redo of a Healer, you are watching a hentai. I'm not against that, I'm just saying that you can't claim you're not. And if you are claiming that you're not because you're watching just that, then you're lying to yourself. But the reason that transferring from one media to the other requires changes is because it doesn't always translate over properly, and I'm going to use Naruto as my example here. In a manga, it's easy to show how someone's thought process went through discovering something in a battle. It's very easy to go from one step to the next in these little balls of text. In a show, you are constrained by time, and there's a motion of time that you have to pay attention to that will change that drastically. One of the major issues is that there's so many times where in anime, you will have a character thinking in their head about what's going on and planning out their strategy, and it feels like it's taking a really long time, and it is. It is taking a long time. Why is this fight taking so long? It's because they're having a fucking soliloquy in their head about things first. But here's the thing, it's not a soliloquy. It's not as long as you think it is. It's not supposed to be. If you are fighting someone and you notice that they're favoring one side, so you should redirect all of your focus to that side, possibly because they have an injury there or that side's just not something they're good with, so you'll have to focus on moving around to that side in order to get the advantage. Now, it took me quite a while to say that. Almost 10 whole seconds, which in a fight is a large amount of time. But noticing and thinking that did not take anywhere near as long to an actual mind because you don't think that way in words. I'm not a neurologist, I'm not a psychiatric analyst or whatever the fuck actual field of study would be for this, but when you think or notice things, you don't think in words about it. You don't think in descriptions of it. You don't look at something and think, that is a red sky background around gray clouds. You look at it and you know, sky red, clouds there, gray. Your mind does not think in words because words are slow and inefficient. Your noticing of a favoring of a side or a weakness is not something you think in words, and that can't be really portrayed in a moving media. It's something that Naruto does wrong a lot, because they try and carry over these internal dialogues to their actual show, and it doesn't work out. It just feels clunky and heavy inside of the tiny time frame they have. Trying to force your medium to be more like its source material when the source material does not translate well into your new material is going to end up with something looking really bad. So if you transfer from one material to the other, don't get mad when something has to change or when something no longer makes sense. You're going to have to change it in order to make it work with the new medium. And don't get mad when your favorite book gets turned into a movie and they had to change something about it to properly portray it, or even portray it at all, because trying to force it to stay perfectly true to the original medium is almost always going to end up with your story being told poorly in the end. So to summarize, like the title says, the books don't matter, but the medium you choose to portray your story with very much does. Like, comment, subscribe, follow Twitter, all those things that none of you are going to do anyway, but I'd really like it if you did. Also, I might be doing more game-related content in the future. But hey, let me know, are any of you writers? Do any of you disagree with any of the points I've made here? Go down to the comments and we can have a reasonable discourse about it. But if you can't do that, then at least be entertainingly angry.